right, well, I'm not going to reintroduce myself. If you want to know who I am, ask the person next to you. So, social media. It's a big world out there, and I didn't realize you had a social media presentation, but I'm going to talk a little bit about your social media plan, and then we'll talk about the practicals of managing your social media, especially from a conflict or code of conduct perspective. Speaking of that, and I'll send it to you, last time I was here 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we had handed out some templates on discipline and appeals and code of conduct. A lot of you adopted them, which is great, but a lot has changed over the last couple years. Not a ton. You'll still see that the overview is relatively the same, but I will send you an updated one, such as a pre-requirement for your discipline panel, providing yourselves a broader scope of who that panel could be. So it was something that, I forget who I spoke to from here, they sent me their policy and I was like, this is great 5 years ago. So we'll work on that. Just a side note. So I'm going to talk a little bit about implementation of social media, and then we'll talk about, again, the conduct side on how to manage that. So as you can see, and I don't even know what most of these are, but that's just a small taste of the social media that's available to us to leverage what we want to do to get the word out there. Obviously, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, those are the biggies that people are engaging in. Youth, as most of you would know, especially if you have teenagers, that's the way they communicate. They text. They don't talk anymore. Even when they're sitting across the table from each other, they text. Kevin, my partner, who works a lot on social media, coaches baseball, and he texts his players. He figures that's the only way he can actually reach out to them and get them to practice and to know what's going on with their team. They don't do email anymore. They won't use email. Very few of them have an email account. So we obviously know the power of social media is really huge. If we could get our message across to hundreds of people with a click of a button, obviously there's simplicity to that, and it's a very useful tool to market, manage, get information out there. So there's two types of social media engagement. There's your internal use and your external use. How are your members using social media? Are they using it with each other? Are they using it with your coaches? And then what's your internal social media plan? And we always have this discussion in our business where we need a Twitter account. And Kevin, who does all our social media, says, why? Why do you need a Twitter account? And the answer is, well, everybody else has one. Or why do you want Facebook? Well, everybody else has one. And obviously that's not the intent. It has to be, again, going back to your strategic plan or your pièce de résistance. Why do you exist? Is it part of our plan? And how do we engage social media to get our plan? And maybe social media is not the way for us to go. I don't think that's necessarily true, but it's something we have to consider because managing social media is hard. It's hard. You open a forum, somebody writes something negative. Is somebody reading it on a daily basis? Taking away the negative aspects of it. Do you want discussion? How do we manage it? Are you constantly updating your website to create traffic, to create continuity within your association? We try and blog on our site once a week, trying to get a new article up there so people will come back. We have a little, I don't know how effective it is, but we have a little notable on our website where we talk about things that are happening on a quick basis. But again, little strategy is going to be required to implement your social media plan. So where do you want to engage? Again, the popular ones seem to be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Anybody else? Any other new ones? I'm starting to lose my touch with reality. I'm almost 40. So, which do you use? And what's the leverage behind using it? And again, I think you need to have a better argument than what everybody else is doing it. And if you create a Facebook page and no one's managing it, no one's updating it, obviously it becomes stale. People stop going to it. Who are we trying to engage? Okay, we get 500 followers on our Facebook page. Does that mean anything? What if we had 5,000? What if we had 10? But it's the 10 people or the 25 people that actually are engaged in our association. And we have the same discussions in our group. Well, we have a Facebook page. We want 1,000 followers, and our newsletter has 1,500, but we want 3,000. But is the answer why? We have, I'll tell you, transparency, 1,700 people on our newsletter, 30% of them open it. Okay, so if I get 5,000 on my newsletter and 10% open it, I'm at the same position. So who are we trying to engage? What should we be engaging? What's the content? What's the purpose of our social media policy, our social media plan? Is it to get awareness, to get people talking, to promote an event? Again, we don't just want to do it to do it. We want to be strategic. And again, how should we engage? Your social media, Your social media engagement should connect to your organization's strat plan. This is our conversation in our business. Let's use Twitter for something. Why? Like what? For what? Who's on it? Who's going to follow us? I'm quite personally afraid to use Twitter for our personal business because I'll probably say something stupid. Hey everybody, that dumb club or PSO didn't screen and now they have a criminal issue. So I'm a little scared to use it just for that particular meeting use. We need more people to attend our tournament. Let's use Twitter. Okay, we've got an intent, we've got a purpose behind it. We know who, what, when, why, and how. So just really crucial to have that. So a sample strat plan featuring social media. Okay, again, what's our objective? To increase awareness. Awareness about what? A tournament, about our sport, more member engagement. Who's our audience? This goes back to that anti-spam stuff. The scope of our audience is now somewhat restricted because we need them to opt in. Now, Facebook and Twitter is actually an interesting debate because in order to receive a Facebook message, what do they have to do? Opt in. They have to like you or join your Twitter feed. So we could likely make a legal argument that people who have joined your Facebook page or your Twitter account have opted to receive commercial messages. That's where you can start. Maybe that's your platform to get your message out rather than e-news, where people can get there. A lot of organizations are starting to use stories as a strategy to engage people. Did everyone see the WestJet Christmas YouTube video? Right? I heard it was on CBC Radio, so I saw the video and CBC Radio did a spot on it. Their expectations were that they would get 10,000 views, and I think it ended up over 10 million. So their expectations were beyond, and obviously from their strategic perspective, it hit all parameters, and it showed just how good, or hopefully we think how good WestJet is. Anybody get a present? Everyone familiar with the video? They videotape.
With the underwear and socks one.
Were you?
That was.
There was one guy who asked for underwear. Yeah, what do you want? Well, underwear and socks.
Well, apparently they gave everybody what they wanted. One guy did ask for a car. Apparently that was the only guy who didn't get. So what they did is in Toronto, people who were walking to their plane to Calgary, they were stopped at a video, and Santa came on the screen, and they were able to you had to scan your ticket, and the information went instantly to Santa, who came on the screen and said, "Hi, Steve. Hope you have a safe trip to Calgary. What would you like to have as a Christmas gift?" And what they did was they went through the entire plane, and as they arrived in Calgary, all the gifts with their names were coming off the luggage thing, and everybody, they videotaped it, and one guy flat screen TV, kids were getting trucks and cars. It was really, Google it if you haven't seen it. It was really quite emotional. And obviously that met all their strategic plans and then some from a communications perspective. How we look at WestJet now might be a little bit different than we did before. So just strictly obviously posting, hey, we're having a tournament, we may need to think a little bit outside of the box. And what are our timelines and what are our results? Is success necessarily more people? And the answer to that is I don't know. It depends on what your goals are. I'd rather communicate with 100 people that are going to open my message and read it than 1,700 and half of them, well, 2/3 don't. So, is success may not necessarily always be numbers. So some sampled objectives, athlete awareness. Hey, here are the good things that are happening in our sport. So-and-so's doing this, and this is how they did it. Promoting teams, tournament results, education, acquiring more funds. Maybe it's a fundraising tool to use as well. Who's the audience? Obviously, young people is going to be one of them. Athletes, people interested in athletes. That would be huge. We're always talking about engaging our coaches and our athletes and our volunteers. What about people beyond that? I always joke with people, they know I'm a sports lawyer, but they say, can you get me Raptor tickets? Can you get me Leaf tickets? And the short answer to that is no, but if you'd like to go to the Ontario Rugby Championships, I'm the guy. Can we get people beyond our sector involved, which is obviously a key issue, and showing the government some good things we're doing as well as parents. Parent education is becoming massive, and actually a good quick little caveat is Hockey Alberta, and maybe you guys do it here, I don't know. Hockey Alberta makes every parent that plays hockey go through a code of conduct course. Their kids cannot play hockey unless they take that course. And the number of hockey parent issues in Alberta have reduced substantially. My favorite story about hockey parents is a woman was flashing a goalie and the kids were 7. So I told you can't make this stuff up, I'm telling you. I know, exactly. The problem is most of you will know who I'm talking about. So again, who's our audience? Can we go beyond just our little core circle? And a great resource to get messages out there that maybe we normally can't. What's the best way to reach our audience? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. My wife works for Parks and Rec Ontario, and she works for High Five. I don't know if people are familiar with High Five here. It's quality assurance for sport and recreation in Canada. And they govern instructors basically for kids 6 to 12. And what they wanted to do was try and get engagement with respect to High Five. And they went through and advertised to all the communities across Canada. They call them their registered organizations. And they said, we're going to have a contest, and you have to create a video of an epic high five. And they showed a sample video of their office basically all getting together and going like this. And they challenged all the registered organizations to create their own video, and the winner got $1,000 or $10,000 in recreation equipment. They got a sponsor, and their goal was to get 500 new followers to YouTube or on their YouTube channel. And the social media guy at Parks and Rec Ontario said they were going to get 1,000. So my wife was not very happy that he made it higher than she had expected. Anyway, they ended up the videos were amazing. There was almost 40 to 45 organizations who posted videos, and they ended up with 5,000 people who now follow their YouTube page through, really it was just a whole bunch of people doing a cool way of high fives. One group had basically a relay in their recreation facility. The gym instructor high five the swim guy, he'd dive into the water, swim across, and really creative stuff. And obviously they increased awareness about the program, and they had some fun doing it. So just being creative obviously is something that's really quite important. Go ahead.
Add something. Like it also, like if you also said the WestJet guys probably had 10,000 message, or like how fast it can travel around with like whatever message you have.
Oh, the stuff that, it's
So
interesting.
the power of social media is actually like you can't predict, because like people, I guess people sometimes trying to predict what you can get, but like it's hard to do.
It's hard to do. Like at WestJet for sure did not have the expectations that it would go that well. I was listening to CBC the other day, and they listed the reason they were talking about it, Gundam Style, 2 billion views. Number one on YouTube. Number two was Eminem and Rihanna, and then number three was like this kid laughing. 700 million views of some child laughing. And in Ontario, there's an organization called Sport for Ontario. They do advocacy work, and the administrative assistant there has a video of her dog barking, and it has over 1 million hits. It's like the dog's barking at a squirrel. It sounds like a little bit like a person, but very strange. Anyway, if you get your athletes to bark and rap, you'll be good. The other important part about social media is you really need to have a person dedicated to do it. It's almost a full-time job. Do we have the resources to update our social media? Again, if it stays stale, I think we're going to lose a bit of traction. So we need strategy. What can we do? What can't we do? What do we not want to do, right? And I'll get into that from a policy perspective. What material can we share, do not share? Are we talking about people in a negative light? Are we talking about them in a positive light? Do we have their permission? I mean, again, going back to those strange occurrences within sport, I've had, again, the few privacy complaints I've had, the visa one, and then the other ones relate to people literally in witness protection programs. They don't want to be on Facebook. They don't want to be on Twitter. Or parents who have restraining orders against their husband or wife, or there's a child custody issue, and they know little Johnny's playing at field A at 6 o'clock. So we have to be a little bit careful there about privacy and about defamation. Do we say something negative about somebody? And who decides what we do? Is it one core person in your organization who's responsible for social media? Do we have 5 people posting on your Facebook page or your email website, things like that? So timelines and results after we've done all this strategic thinking. When do we want to achieve the objective? Is it short term, long term? And how do we know the objective is achieved? Again, going back to predefining your caveats of success, analyzing those successes or failures, and saying how can we change to get there. So really simple strat plan. And here's 5 steps to move forward. Again, depending on the resources of your organization and the plan you want to implement, first and foremost, we recommend one dedicated person. So in our organization, we have one person who is responsible for our social media. He does our Facebook postings, he does our email send-outs, he does our website. Now we'll send him articles and say post this, but he manages it, and he basically tells us what to do, which is great. Other multiple media initiatives. Okay, content's hard to come by. We again try and blog on our website to keep people current, to keep things up to date. To sit down and write a blog, as most of you know, to write for an hour or 2 hours, it's challenging. I find it very difficult to find a 2-hour window without an email disrupting me or a phone ringing. So can we do that? And can we, again, engage Twitter, Facebook, and email and webpage all at the same time? Maybe it's too much. And again, maybe go back to your audience as to which is the most successful way of doing that. So a little bit of strategic planning there. Again, goals and objectives. What's our message and our role? Again, I keep referring back to our strat plan. And then freedom to be reflective. Employer, empower your employees. Again, I don't know if a lot of you have staff. If you do, it may be nominal, but maybe it's a portfolio for one particular staff member or one particular volunteer. Know the law. So again, we're talking about privacy of information, using people's image rights that you may not have consent to. Most people, realistically, would be very happy to have their image on your website or your Facebook page. There's probably that 1% where they're very concerned, or they have the ability to make money off their image. Now you're looking at it's basically inappropriate use of someone's image. We all own our face, our bodies, our images, and we have the right to make money off of that. Who's a famous Manitobian?
Clara Hughes.
Clara Hughes. So Clara obviously has huge image rights, value to her image. One of the first issues with respect to personality image rights was Wayne Gretzky. Somebody threw 99 on the back of an ad. Okay, we all know 99 is Wayne Gretzky. Wasn't his likeness, wasn't his image, but if we can assimilate it back to a person who has the right to earn income, then it becomes an issue. Honestly, in amateur sport, there's probably a handful of athletes that have the ability to make some money off their image. Most of them will be very just pleased that you posted their picture. I've done a lot of athlete agreements, and a lot of times part of an athlete agreement, the image rights is the biggest issue, where the NSO or the PSO gets to use their picture on the organization's website or Sport Manitoba's website. And in my 12 years, we've had one issue with it, one agent who didn't want it rubber stamped, and we negotiated through it. And it was also a speed skater who was very well known. So most of the time, from the legal perspective of image use, you're not going to have a problem. But be aware that it's there. Be aware about that, use of image. I don't want you to go. I prefer you to go to somebody if you're going to post their picture and ask their permission, right? Especially if you're going to post it on 500 posters before you go spend that kind of money.
What about somebody sends you tweets you a photo and you want to retweet it?
Of myself?
Of themselves, let's say. Or...
So I would probably make the argument that it's I've consented. Again, in my experience, I want to distinguish slightly between the law and reality. The law says you should get permission. Reality says I'm really happy you just retweeted it, right? It just really depends on the person, and I think part of posting images on social media is about knowing your audience. And a quick story, I know it's a little bit different, but I had a discipline matter a couple years ago where a coach at the practice yelled, "Hurry the F up." And 19 people, you know what they did? Hurried up. The 20th person said, "Oh my God, you scarred me," and filing a complaint. And we found him guilty of breaching the code of conduct, and he called me, really nice guy. He said, I respect your decision, I understand what I did wrong, but how do I communicate with my athletes? And the answer I told him was, you have to know your personality, you have to know your person. Fred, hurry the F up. He may run faster. She may not. Broke down, right? It's about knowing your athlete. And I would say the same thing on image use or using people's information. But consent always eliminates any sort of problem with respect to that. Question? Okay, what do your results look like? Is there more engagement? Again, it's really going to be subjective with respect to results-oriented. Are we active? Are we passive? Again, is it not the number of followers or friends, but is it we had an increase of 10% in that tournament, or our membership numbers have increased? Social media, people always talk about, views may be a direct contact, but followers or people on our newsletter, again, I go back to our particular one, 1,700, 500 read it. Well, what are the other 1,200 doing, or why do they want to be on my list, but they don't want to click to even open the newsletter? So success for us may not be 3,000. It's actually probably getting the 500 to 1,000 who actually open it. So be aware of that. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, because I know you guys have touched on this already. I don't want to Okay, I'm not going to run out of slides. We better start asking questions. So there's multiple, in my opinion, there's multiple social media policies. What should be said? So who are we talking to and what should we say? What media will we use? Who will use which media? What oversight is required? And what shouldn't be said? So a social media policy, I've given you three. Internal policy. How do we as an organization manage social media? And really it's just respect to conduct. Then we talk about the external use. What are we sending out? Why, how, and when? And then the third one is specifically the code of conduct. And we'll get into talking about jurisdiction, which I think is the biggest problem or issue with social media is when do we decide that when Fred sends something on social media, it now becomes a basketball Manitoba issue. And that's really the big caveat, the big problem, or the big issue. So you've got sample of all of those, and we'll walk through them. Code of conduct. A code of conduct prohibits conduct. It also may be a list of positive statements. You will act this way, you will not act this way. I think you have to be very strategic with your code of conduct. I'm not a huge fan of policy on policy on policy. So I have a coach's code of conduct, an athlete code of conduct, a director's code of conduct, a committee member's code of conduct. Why can't we have one code of conduct? And right now, and I've given you one, and I'm going to give it to you with a caveat to say, can you include the social media conduct into your regular code of conduct? Because to be honest with you, when I say, if I write something, Fred is a blank on Facebook, sorry, Fred, my code of conduct is going to say all athletes should be respectful to one another. Okay? If I do it face-to-face or I do it on social media, in my opinion, it's the same. So I've given you the caveat or the template of a code of conduct, but again, can you incorporate it into your code, or do you already have it in your code of conduct? So it may be something you don't need to be specific about. We tend to be reactive from policy perspective when something new comes out. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, risk management. Okay? Risk management policy. To be blunt, I'm not even sure what a risk management policy is. I'm going to make sure that risk is covered, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure we eliminate risk. That's kind of what we do on a daily basis. So we create social media policies because it's the hot topic, but I'm trying to say maybe you've already covered it through your code of conduct, through your discipline policies anyway. So somebody brought it up before about policies as a whole. The legal principles behind not-for-profits and members or registrants is contract. You become a member of Basketball Manitoba. By virtue of that membership, I'm agreeing to comply with your bylaws, your policies, your procedures, and so are you as the organization. You agree as the governing body to agree to abide by. There's case law to suggest that happens inherently. Okay, by becoming a member or becoming a participant, you agree to comply. I personally, again, going back to express consent, I like to have express consent to say I agree. So in my registration form, and some of you may have a copy of my template, name, address, phone number, how much am I going to pay for my club, consent for my image use, my privacy information, anti-spam consent, and I agree to abide by the policies and procedures of the organization, including the code of conduct. So I want to try and make sure I have that relationship. And that's really also important, as we discussed this morning. If you reduce your membership classes to not everybody within the scope of your sport, there's a chance there's a gap. So if I can get that at point of registration, I've got that contract with my participants, with my members. Clear as mud? Everybody doing all right after lunch? Yep. Last Saturday I did bylaws with Ontario Ringette, and of course most people there were sitting. And somebody came up to me afterwards and said, that was excellent. I said, well, if you thought bylaws was excellent, then I must have done one hell of a job. So I'm not taking it personally that half of you are like this. You do probably want to make reference to social media. Again, I reiterate the fact that it's probably covered in your code of conduct. And those of you who have my template from 2 years ago, it really, in my opinion, covers everything. But again, I go back to hot topic, let's be specific, and people will have those expectations. Discipline and conduct is really about managing expectations. We expect you to act this way at training, on travel, and you know what? At home, especially when it comes to this. And where the interesting part comes in is, do you and when do you decide you want to be involved? Policies for social media used informed by common sense, the laws created by statutes, and by case law. Okay, there's very little case law right now on social media, but there's huge campaigns about online bullying. There's legislation right now before the Ontario or the federal government about bullying, cyberbullying. Okay, it may become a criminal offense. Unfortunately, I can't remember the young girl's name who correct, who committed suicide after receiving cyberbullying. So pay attention as this goes down the political legislative approval process. It may become a criminal issue that I'm not saying we as PSOs or clubs have to manage, but we should be aware of it. Use your common sense, obviously, to navigate your social media issues. Policy, again, I said it this morning, is your best friend. Okay? I'll give you a screening example. A couple years ago, a client calls me and said, Steve, we screened all our coaches. I'm like, great. They said, we got a positive check. I said, okay. What's he charged with? Don't know. What do you mean don't know? Well, it just says section 144 of the criminal code. I said, okay, well, let's Google it. Anytime you're unsure, ask Google. So we Google the criminal code, section 144, possession of marijuana. I said, well, and then it said sanction, 2 years in jail. I said, well, I don't really know if that means a little bit of marijuana or a lot of marijuana. So I called a friend of mine who's a Crown attorney. I said, I got this guy. He wants to be a coach. He got 2 years in jail for possession of marijuana. I said, what's your opinion on it? He said, well, if he served 2 years in jail, he probably had 2 dump trucks full of marijuana. So in that scenario, I said, well, he's probably not a good coach. But my point to the story is, because their policy was so vague, or had no policy, they really had no idea how to implement the issue before them. And if we manage our social media prior to having an issue, we're active rather than reactive. You don't need to call Steve or the other Steves in Canada. You can just follow your policy on how to manage it. When you apply, when does it apply? What do you do? How do you resolve it? And again, I don't think social media requires you to build new conduct policies. I think you can caveat what you have or piggyback what you have, maybe adding specific sections. But from a complaint management perspective, the process, in my opinion, is going to be relatively the same.
So going back to spam and the internet, that's a whole new ground, July 1st. But there's enough precedents out there that we could anticipate and get some bullets and anticipate what could be coming.
From a legislative perspective?
Well, just to manage prior to reacting.
Yeah, so when I say managing prior, it's going, okay, social media is a hot issue. We have Amanda Todd. We have, I'm sure all of you have some story where some athlete said something negative about a coach or another athlete. I can't even think of some off the top of my head. I know one client of mine recently, they were on a provincial team trip. They took away their phones. They said, it's been a negative experience. They took away the phones, and that's how they managed it. But what I'm trying to say is, if I say something terrible about Fred online, Fred comes to you at Swim Manitoba and says, hey, Steve said I'm an a-hole. Are you prepared? Are you going to say that's not my problem because it happened outside of swimming? Or are you going to say that is my problem because now I have a conflict between 2 swimmers or 2 coaches or whatever we happen to be? So when I say I want you to be proactive, I want you to have policy or procedure in place to know how you're going to manage that. And I'd like to think most of you already have that in place. We just need to maybe tweak it to fit the social media side of it. Before we, what I'm going to do is get into a little bit of privacy discussion, and then talk about, we'll get into the policy specifically. So this is more about employees' right to electronic use or access to electronic use. Do employees have the right to privacy over Sport Manitoba cell phones, Sport Manitoba laptops, or whatever your ED may have a laptop that you guys pay for? So who has right to what? And is the employer permitted to monitor what's on that document? Supreme Court went all the way to the top. High school teacher was provided a laptop. School's technician went in to clean up the laptop, found a nude photo of a student. The technician copied the photo, took the laptop, gave it to the principal. Principal called the police, and teacher was charged with possession of child pornography, criminal use of computer systems. And in court, he argued reasonable expectation of privacy, saying, yeah.
Aren't technicians, when they find something like this, obliged to report it to ERC?
Okay, that's a good side question. So reporting requirements under most legislations is that if a child is in imminent harm, you have to report it. Now, I don't even want to give an opinion as to whether this is imminent harm, but if you know somebody's beating a kid or someone's sexually assaulting a kid, you have the responsibility to disclose that information. My advice always on that scenario is let the police figure it out, right? And it happens I don't want to say it, I'm hesitant to say it because I've lost track about the number of times I've been involved in a sexual assault. Okay, I've lost track. At one point, I was calling them Sexual Assault Fridays, because every Friday at 4 o'clock, I'd get a call saying, it's like I want to send that last email and go home, and I get a phone call, hi, just had a coach charged with sexual assault. And we as an organization have an obligation to make sure our kids, our athletes, are protected. So if there's imminent harm, we have to disclose. Otherwise, technically, we don't. But another it's a total side conversation we can get into it is, what do we do? How do we manage when our coaches are charged with sexual assault? I can walk you through. I've got 2 open cases right now. We just finished. I'm trying to think of the other one. One poor guy in Ontario, volleyball coach, also a teacher. Front page of the Toronto Star, volleyball coach, teacher charged with soliciting prostitution of a minor. Okay, front page of the Star. So the organization calls me, here's the scenario, what do we do? So 2 things, we need to manage it from a media perspective, we need to manage it from a discipline perspective and an image perspective, reputation perspective, and we also have to allow the criminal process to go through its process. So in this particular case, poor guy, 2 weeks later, the back of the Toronto Star and a little blurb like this, wrongful identity. Okay, wrongful identity. He's ruined, correct. I to be honest with you, I don't exactly know what happened to him. But another one that's recently happened, sexual assault allegedly took place in the mid-2000s. Kid was 15, now he's 25. Walks into a national competition, sees the coach, freaks out, calls the cops, calls the NSO. This guy molested me 10 years ago. Okay, this was a Friday. On Monday, this coach was taking 16 kids to China. All right, let's just say I didn't have much of a weekend that weekend. We ended up, because they were prepared, I guess that's the right word, they had policy in place to suspend the individual pending the outcome of a hearing. There was the criminal side of it took 2 months before they laid charges. They investigated, they interviewed, they did a whole bunch of stuff. But we had to manage it through our policies, and luckily enough, they had some caveats in their policy about immediate suspension. And we basically, the counter argument is, well, innocent until proven guilty, like my volleyball guy, my volleyball coach. But we need to outweigh the reputation and image of the organization and the safety of our kids versus, innocent until proven guilty. Another quick one I had. I know we're going into screening, but I think it seems to be okay. Organization does a police record check. Guy comes back clean. Turns out, you gotta love the media. They find out about these things. Guy was charged for some sort of sexual assault in naval court. Okay, JAG. Everyone, JAG TV. And it doesn't show up on the PRC, but it's in the front page of the paper that local club has the president as a sexual predator. The club backed him. We don't care. It was a mistake. He paid his debt to society. Meanwhile, blank club is in the front page of the newspaper saying their president is an offender. So the PSO ended up less policy involved, more politics involved, and the individual was removed. Because that was something that PSO hadn't managed. Because as we discussed this morning, one club goes down, it's likely our PSO goes down with that ship as well. So, I don't remember how we got here, but it's the things that I didn't know existed in sport law 10 years ago. I was like, if you told me I'd be dealing with this stuff, I'd tell you you're crazy. But it unfortunately happens more so than not. There's right now one in Ontario, sailing coach, 16 counts of sexual assault of athletes. There's also another civil suit going on in Ottawa where a coach assaulted a female athlete. The woman was sent to jail for 2 years. Now she's civilly suing the PSO and the NSO for not providing a safe environment. And that's in the middle of their insurance claim. But that's there, and now they're going to look at the PSO and say, what did you do to make sure that coach was safe? Just to scare you a little bit even more, I was shooting the shit with a client, like, hey, how are you? What's going on? Haven't talked to you in a long time. They said, oh, we just hired a new ED. I said, oh, who is it? Maybe I know him. Maybe it's someone who moved around. It's so-and-so. And I kind of go, did you do a police record check? She goes, yeah. I said, nothing came back. She goes, no. So it was basically one of the first files I'd worked on 12 years ago. This guy was in his mid-20s, multiple counts of sexual assault on minors within sport, convicted. I don't know if he specifically did jail time, but for sure would have a police record. Anyway, so I said, I was in a bit of a difficult position because I wasn't sure what I could say and what I couldn't say. I said, well, have you done a police record check? Yeah. I said, well, you should look into that. And it's a small community, and they figured out what was going on pretty quickly. And turns out he forged his police record check. He had his girlfriend do it. I guess basically liquid papered her name, put his name, and submitted a photocopy. They were like, great, police record check. Now, that's just an anomaly. He was charged with fraud. I don't know what happened at the end, but do your due diligence. Sorry. Should we go back to this? So 2 issues came out of this. The police, teacher had reasonable expectation of privacy. The police violated the teacher's charter rights because they did not have a warrant. And they said the employer did not act properly. Finding photos during a routine maintenance was not consistent. Search and seizure was consistent with the principal's duties. So there was some consistency from the employer side as to how their routine was, but there was nothing in their policies to suggest that there was going to be this looking around. So basically, at the end of the day, the court supported the employer. In doing so, the court supported the employer's well-drafted policy and enforced reasonable limitations on privacy, but they said if an employer provides devices and allows the staff to use them on their own time, they have the right to privacy. So basically, to make a long story short on this issue, we need to have well-crafted policies on how we monitor our staff's social media, our staff's devices, electronic mail, internet access, social media, and we want to have those policies communicated so there is no reasonable expectation of privacy from your staff. So that's something you want to include in your radar or your parameters of job performance or job review. Make sure you have some sort of policy that dictates or lets your people, including your volunteers, if you are giving them devices, that you have the right to monitor and review, and they should be using their own personal devices for their own personal issues. This always comes up from a reasonable perspective. You know, this is just one little case study, and I'd be curious to know what you guys think about this. You know, you use Facebook to interact with your friends and family, your athletes, or your whoever else is involved with your PSO finds you as a friend. You've never thought of yourself as a friend to your athlete, you're their coach. Do you accept them on your social media? And these are the things that we need to think about in advance. And the short answer to all of this is, if you decide to accept one, do you then have to accept all of them? Or do you only accept the cool kids? And then you've got a dynamic problem within your club, within your organization. So this is just one simple example of things that we need to think about from social media perspective. And I know it goes beyond necessarily a PSO, but that's just one simple case study where we need to be predetermined on how we're going to deal with these issues. Anybody want to comment on that? Yeah.
My background is in broadcasting, and I worked at a broadcaster which was one of the Olympic broadcasters in 2010. All of the employees were given Olympic logoed merchandise to wear. Someone posted on their personal page them partying in this Olympic merchandise with the broadcaster name very large on, and this particular employee was asked to take that picture down and refused, saying,
It's private.
I can put what I want on my Facebook page. So it's interesting. I had to hold a session for all the employees to explain to them how Facebook really isn't private, and people could look at it. And what came out of that was really interesting, because people are unaware. They think they've set their privacy limits to a certain point, but it's so easy to circumvent them. Kids all know how to do it, to look at each other's pictures. And employers are looking there. Universities, when you tell kids you're applying to a university, universities are looking at what you've got on your Facebook page. So don't think that your party pictures aren't showing up. So it's interesting how people think it's my
private.
It's like what I've got in a photo album at home. It's really not.
Employers are starting to use Google and Facebook and on Twitter as references to see what so and so said, see what pictures they've posted.
And there's been case law around that. People saying that wasn't intended to be part of my resume, but they are allowed to do that.
It's public. If it's publicly accessible, it's publicly accessible. Sorry, 1, 2.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I kind of like the idea of having two accounts potentially, where you have a personal private one for family and friends, and then you could potentially have a public one where you're friends with colleagues, athletes, whatever it might be.
Coach Steve.
Versus
Steve.
Father Steve.
Yeah.
Or whatever, yes.
Like you mentioned, if you accept one athlete as a friend, how do you interact with the rest of the athletes on the team? How is that different than interacting in the gym? Because that social dynamic is there in person as well.
I totally agree with you. I think from a social media perspective, it's very tangible. Meaning objective. Hey, Coach Steve put 1, 2, 3 on his Facebook page, but not 4. Well, 4 is going to know that, right?
Well,
so.
I also know that he knows the gym.
Well, then maybe that coach shouldn't be coaching.
I work in football, and we've had this issue, the staff-athlete interaction on Facebook issue, that's led to us not only writing a social media policy, but having to go and speak to our provincial team coaches. And it came came out of the fact that one of our coaches is a high school coach and had previous friend relationships on Facebook prior to becoming a provincial team coach. So in addition to writing policy and speaking to the coaches about being careful with Facebook, one of the things we've done to at least divert the perception of personal relationship versus team is to simply create a team black, a team gold, a team blue page on Facebook. Use that to communicate your practice times,
So you're making it less of a Coach Steve issue. It's a team page,
team page.
and that page will stick with the team.
Right, and make it a private page. Only members of the team can join and be part of it. And but you still, even though you're giving practice times, you have to be careful about the information that you
That you're posting.
because you don't want people showing up at your practices who shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's a great strategy. No, obviously it's something you've thought about in advance.
But then it also could go the opposite way where, like, you befriend the athletes put on inappropriate stuff on their Facebook, and you still are able to see it as a coach.
How do you react to that?
Yeah, like if they're posting illegal activities on their Facebook and they're a minor, then in your code of conduct, if you say no drinking within the season or whatever,
And then you see them with a beer.
then there's more issues.
I mean, it's a huge concern, right? And I'll even challenge you with this one. So this is also something to consider. If I wave to a kid, if a kid waves to me on a bus and I wave back, I'm a nice guy. If I wave to a bus, I'm a pedophile. And it's almost the same thing from social media. If I start adding kids or my athletes, especially underage athletes, and not necessarily have a strategy behind that, am I grooming? Am I recruiting? What's my intent? And again, things that coaches need to think about. I mean, my volleyball coach, right? Wrongful identity. Volleyball coach, teacher. He's probably cooked, right? That's not necessarily a great example from a social media perspective, but we know one false allegation and you're done. So really, really good suggestions and things that you do obviously need to think about. I want to get into the policies themselves and just walk you through those. So I've provided you 3 different templates. We'll start with the internal social media use policy. So this is really about how are we going to manage social media internally, who's responsible for it, and what are the parameters under which that person is to operate. So I always this is just my style, definitions at the beginning. What is basically I've encompassed branded social media to be all social media, and representatives are who this policy is going to apply to, and you'll see that I've tried to, you might have to doctor this for your own sport, but to talk about staff, contract, volunteers, anybody who will have access to the social media, your PSO social media on behalf of your social media. What's the purpose of the policy? And it's really just to provide guidelines on how you're going to manage your social media internally. Who does it apply to? To everybody who's a representative. And then what I've done in section 4 is you will not. Okay, so these are the things you won't do. Use it for fraud. You will comply with our code of ethics. You won't display favoritism. You won't upload or post emails or transmit unlawful, abusive, confidential, breach of intellectual property, something that's did I say confidential? Yeah, confidential. And also segueing between personal social media, and a lot of you have addressed that, and organizational social media. Use your judgment. Obviously, we trust that people have most standards in law, or most standards of conduct is reasonableness. What would a reasonable person do in a similar circumstance? And then the organization's responsibility, and then the breach. So you'll see, from a discipline and complaints process. Again, I go back to the template you had 2 years ago. I don't want to create another discipline process in this policy. Hopefully I already have one, and I just refer back to that policy. Now again, these are templates. Great place to start. You'll have to tweak it for your organization. My favorite template story, I did a waiver for a client, and at the top it said, insert name of organization. And they got 500 people to sign this waiver. And you know what it said? I agree to indemnify, insert name of organization. Okay? You're going to say that was you?
No.
Oh.
Number 5 on here, can you just explain that a little bit more for me?
So I think my intent here is that sometimes obviously there's websites, blogs, chats where things might start being discussed. So what I'm trying to say here is rather than having staff personally engage people on those sites without any oversight, is to take it a step back, come up maybe with a strategy on how to manage that, and then deal with it from an organizational perspective. Because depending on the person, and you guys probably know that guy or girl, I call it that guy, where you cannot win, you cannot negotiate, you cannot discuss. And maybe by engaging that person through social media not only puts the organization in bad light, but ends up leading you down a path you weren't prepared to go. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is take a step back, review what's going on, and then come up with a strategy on how to manage that.
How do you deal with, I mean, because in so many cases, the ones that are really using this are kids. How do you deal with the fact that, you know, you get them to sign a policy or something, and you get their parents to sign it too, or how do you
Yes.
get around that?
So I guess they'll take it back to registration. There's two sides of this. So registration, if it's a minor, I get a parent to sign off on it. I usually get the kid to sign and the parent to sign. If the kid's 5, then fine, but most of the time they have the capacity to understand most of it. You run into, be honest with you, and I have this discussion all the time, everything's online now, right? Online waivers, online registration. Is it foolproof? No. Do I know that you clicked I accept and it wasn't your 12-year-old kid? No. But I think, again, would I prefer that I sit there and watch you sign it and notarize it? Or yes, but that's not the reality of where we're going. Online contracts are valid. There's a lot of case law to support. Click-through agreements are valid, and the more steps you make people jump through, the better. Click, click, click. I agree, but it's not foolproof, right? It's hard to be blunt. In my experience, I haven't had anybody had that bite them yet.
And I think the perception by kids, even if they know it's not legally binding or whatever, the perception by kids that you held them to that standard and had them click through or sign or whatever, that they're held then to that too.
I mean, I don't think they'd be able to rely on their illegal activity as a defense, right? I mean, and again, most of these issues legally would be dealt with internally. The laws of an internal organization are not like a court. They can be much less restrictive. So we have a lot of flexibility from that perspective, as long as we provide procedural fairness. Know the case against you, right to defend yourself, and a fair decision maker. Okay, procedural fairness can be as much as, hey Janet, I heard you said something bad. What do you have to say for yourself? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, you're out of here. You're suspended.
That's an interesting one that we've come across is sort of the consequences. Because I think in some ways PSOs, or a couple of them, have taken a really strong stand on social media, and where we've had athletes who are actually banned from the sport for life, based on, you know, pretty significant stuff, right? But we've also had a situation where, you know, it was language, and everybody who was engaged in it felt like there
somebody's not happy.
10% of the population thinks that wasn't any action at all. The other, the other 80-90% doesn't care.
Right.
Right? And then there's flip-flopping the other way, that the consequences were too severe, and it still didn't really right the ship because it still happened. Everybody knew about it.
Yeah. So.
Facebook page complained about it.
And then they talk about it on Facebook, right? To me, that extends beyond social media. That to me is all about managing complaints, managing discipline, and it's a broad discussion. I like in my discipline policies to be extremely broad, with respect to procedure, with respect to decision makers, and with respect to sanctions. Because if we try and box it in, I know in soccer they have predetermined sanctions. You could go punch an official. I guess I shouldn't use that example here. I know. But you could do something very serious and be suspended for a month because they have a predetermined sanction where that person should be banned for life. I personally like broad discretion. I like to appoint a case manager, I call them, to manage the procedure. They will facilitate the document exchange or the complaint and the response, and they'll facilitate the appointment of the panel. Now, if it's, I called you an a-hole, my panel composition probably doesn't have to be as onerous as if there was a sexual assault or a breach of position of trust and authority or something more serious, where I might need a lawyer on the panel or I might need an official or whatever it is. But I don't like predetermining who the panel's going to be. It's going to go to my discipline panel. Well, my discipline panel, one's in Florida on vacation, the other one's in China, and the third one has parent-teacher night. So now what do I do? Getting 3 people I always find challenging, to be honest. Most of the time we work with 1, unless it's extraordinary circumstances. And then the sanction is broad. Again, letter of apology all the way to expulsion. And at the end of the day, you hope that the people you pick are reasonable. So I'm a little apprehensive, Janet, to say, this is A versus B. It's about getting the right people.
I think what I was trying to point out, you exactly explained it, but I think with social media, it's just more, like often when there's a complaint,
Yep.
even a written complaint to support, it isn't so public.
Correct.
And people often don't even know what the discipline action was.
Right.
With social media, it's just so much more visible, and people find out about it in a different way. And I think that the challenge is that people feel like social media is being treated more harshly than other actions.
It is right now because it's a hot topic,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's talking about cyberbullying, about Amanda Todd, about all these things that are happening. And I don't want to take away from all those things, but it is a hot topic, and it does get more media attention. I had a case where an individual was suspended from her school for cyberbullying and was kicked off her team for the same reason, and then after a couple of weeks they allowed her to come back, and the parents of the team revolted, and the club didn't care. They said, we think this is the right decision. So again, it's not, in my opinion, this isn't so much about social media, it's about managing disputes, managing complaints. So normally I'd have 2 or 3 policies, depending if you want to add the third: complaints, appeals. You don't like the decision the club made to reappoint this girl, appeal it. But appeals are usually limited to procedure, not a fact. To give 2 people a kick at the can at Jimmy punched me in the nose doesn't make sense. You could also add a dispute resolution policy, which allows for negotiation and mediation. Mediation is very successful. I had a mediation. I was managing it. I wasn't the mediator. I was the case manager. And I was like, there's no way in hell this is going to settle. There was lawyers on both sides. One guy had lots of money, so he was happy to fund it. And they agreed to mediate, and the mediator called me. He's like, we settled it. I said, oh, good. Wow, thank you. It was great. So, in that scenario, or my example where I just gave you where the club decided to put the athlete back in, I think that's a perfect mediation opportunity. Explain why the club made that decision. And, to be honest with you, let's hear what the parents have to say, what their concerns are, and get that information. So for me, as I kind of am repeating myself a little bit, social media is a hot topic. It stands alone right now, but I'd like to think we already have policy in place to manage it.
So would it be the same cases
Sure. So,
So, if we
yeah,
so call.
the medium, to me, it's not the medium. And when I mean the medium, I mean social media, or I say it to you. If you threaten somebody, you threaten somebody. If your breach of conduct is on Facebook instead of to your face, it's still a breach of the code of conduct.
It's kind of that jurisdiction though, because
That's
if
the
it is two
problem.
athletes just talking to each other, if they're on the provincial team together, then is it under the jurisdiction of the PSO? Or is that, you know, if
Or it
it's
could be in
parental,
the club
yeah,
it's happening at.
exactly. And then does it become the responsibility of the PSO? That's what we're encountering.
Yeah, I mean, and the short answer is that's a decision you have to make in advance, right? If I say negative things about Fred on Facebook, does Sport Manitoba want to get involved? And I would think the answer, to be honest with you, is most of the time the answer is going to be yes, if it disrupts the organization internally. And does it damage the reputation of the organization? And if the answer is yes, you get involved. Now, I was just looking at this particular policy. This is my external social media policy applying to my athletes, coaches, volunteers, etc. And you'll see I'm referring it back to my discipline and complaints policy for a procedure. But here's my conduct. Now, I haven't specifically got into the jurisdiction of this policy. I've said it applies to all stakeholders who are my athletes, coaches, etc. Sometimes I may add the caveat when the action occurs during sanctioned activity and events. That restricts my jurisdiction, right? A lot of times I'll say within my activities, events, unless it harms the reputation of the organization or accepted on the sole discretion of the club. So the kind of the catch-all. I'm trying to think if I should tell you which way to go. I'm not sure. It's it's really interesting. Discipline and complaints in sport is a huge topic for multiple reasons. Club suspends a kid. My favorite is club suspend a kid because parents are crazy, right? It's like me stealing a car and Fred goes to jail for it. They complain to the PSO that the kid got kicked out. What's PSO say? Not my problem. Club issue, right? The recourse available to people in sport at a club level and a PSO level is court. You don't like the way a PSO managed it, you go to court. There's one NSO, soccer, that I know you can appeal to the NSO. So if you don't like your club's decision, you go to the PSO, you can go to the NSO. As you go up the ladder, it's more money. Ringette does something. I know can you go to Ringette Canada? No. Yeah.
We changed our appeal policy too, right? Remember, because at one time our clubs could appeal a decision
To you.
club level to us,
We took it out.
Decision.
I do appeal management for the OSA, Ontario Soccer, and they actually did some interesting things. 5 years ago, we had over 100 appeals. Okay, a lot. They went out and educated and trained their decision makers within the regions. This year, we're at 7. All right, so education went a long way in that perspective. And last year we had total 21, which is a huge, from 100, it's huge. But predetermining your jurisdiction is important, or allowing yourself to have broad discretion on that jurisdiction. Because again, within sport, if you can't manage it within your club, it's very unlikely your PSO is getting involved, and vice versa with your NSO. And the other interesting thing about discipline and complaint is reciprocity. That the club suspends you, does the PSO recognize it? If the PSO suspends you, does the club recognize it? Can I go register with another club? So Winnipeg suspends me. Can I go to another town and register with their club? So it's we can do that next time. But it's really something to consider. And again, I know I want you to take one thing out of everything. So out of this, I want you to go back and look at your social media. Hopefully you've already managed it through your current policies. And if you haven't, I'd probably only recommend subtle tweaks. You could probably manage this through your discipline policy.
Can I just ask a question? I'm pretty, know very little about this stuff. At times, we've had kids accuse each other of having said something
saying, well, no, I didn't say that. And so, how does all this stuff work? Like, can people forge texts, forge emails? I don't, if someone says I didn't do this, what do you do?
Well, okay, so I think you have two issues there. One is the procedure of managing your complaint, and two is the validity of evidence. I'm not going to speak to forging emails, and because I don't even somebody
Yes, you
here
can.
somebody here could do that better than I
Yes, you
can.
How do you know, Gina?
How do I know? No, not that.
'Cause, yeah.
No, my husband is a forensic computer specialist. So he has.
Does he want to be on a board?
This I'll give you his name.
Yeah.
He has told me of situations, not specific, but where he has done investigations where emails have been forged, and it looks like it's coming from somebody else, and then they find out later that it wasn't from that particular person, but from somebody else. So it can be done.
There's the Chris Anderson case. Was that around here?
The Easter case.
Yeah.
Easterville, Manitoba.
Yeah. So that was all misrepresentation.
Yeah.
Is everyone familiar with that case? Chris Anderson's a basketball player with the Miami Heat. He's got tattoos up to his neck and a mohawk. You can't miss him. And he's 6'12" or 6'11", so you definitely can't miss him. A woman in Manitoba created an online profile with his picture and started trying to raise money or blackmailing people, and then doing something with child pornography. And anyways, the police started investigating Chris Anderson. He ended up losing his contract with Utah. Do you remember? Where was he before Miami?
No, he was with, give me a second there,
Denver. Ended up losing his contract. Nobody would touch him because of the investigation. And finally it came out that it was wrongful identity. It was a woman here who was trying to blackmail money out of him. And that's when shortly thereafter he signed with the Heat and won an NBA championship. And may win another one soon. Yeah, I don't know where we are.
Yeah, just
Oh, the two processes.
one saying that they on Facebook, this one said that and that one said this.
So we've got some evidence to suggest that things can be changed. From a procedure perspective, again, I really think having somebody who has a little bit of experience dealing with complaints is really important. It's interesting from where we sit. We used to do a lot of representation. If there was a complaint, we would represent the PSO. So we'd be counsel for the PSO or the NSO. Now our role is changing. We're actually managing the process. We manage the document exchange or the he said this and she said that. We appoint the decision maker, and we then notify the PSO, here's the end result based on the panel's decision. So, what I'm trying to reinforce here is the level of procedural fairness, the level of managing a complaint. If it's you're an a-hole, I'm not having a full-blown hearing. Hey, tell me what happened, and let the decision maker make a reasonable decision. It's up to that decision maker to decide whether they believe you more than Fred, or vice versa, or the email was doctored. And again, that's why it's important to have a little bit of discretion as to who your board or your panel is. Maybe we need a forensic computer scientist to decide whether it's, I don't have that expertise. Show me an email. Okay, it looks like an email, right? So from a complaint management perspective, and I'm happy to share it so you can send it out again, you'll see in the policy, in the complaints policy, that I'm very broad on how complaints are managed. And I leave it up to the case manager to say, can I do it via oral discussion, or do I need a court-like setting where they do binder exchange and I need a 3-person panel to sit and decide the case? And as the sanctions are likely going to increase, we increase that procedural fairness, right? So if you're going to be at the end result is you might get expelled, I'm going to have more hurdles than if I'm going to tell you to go apologize to Fred. It could be a lot smaller.
What about the taking away of phones? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, it was actually a huge issue because the parents were going crazy. Well, how do I get in touch with my kid? Well, how about the coach will hold the phone, and if you text them, we'll make sure they text back. Or you'll know they're on the bus between 2 and 4. That's how they managed it. I think I don't think confiscation is necessarily the answer. I think that's the last resort. It's probably a bigger problem if you have to take away the phones.
If you want to do it, it happens anyway.
If it doesn't happen on the bus ride, it'll happen the next day, right? So I think it's a bigger issue. I mean, this whole bullying campaign, harassment issue, it's all about educating people. Bullies are allowed to be bullies because people back them. People let happen what happens, right? And now there's a big, I know for sure if you go on YouTube, you'll see scenarios where someone's getting bullied and then 5 people come and support the person getting bullied. So I think a lot of that's education. Reasonable decisions in reasonable circumstances. What do they say? If common sense were more common, it would be more common.
Common sense isn't as common today as it used to be.
Yeah, something like that. So this policy, as I said, it's external, so it would be to our players, our coaches. Here's their expectations of conduct. You could probably just copy and paste this section 4 into your code of conduct if you already have one, and this part too. And then here's just some guidelines for coaches and athletes and club responsibilities, again, to give you some guidance as to things to think about. They're not black and white rules. They're guidelines on how to think about using your social media policies, things like that. I'm not going to you can read this on your own. Just remember, if you're going to use it, you're not organization. I tried. Yeah. We got about 10 more minutes. I'm happy to discuss anything. Anything that's keeping you up at night. This is we call this pro bono law. Does anybody want to go completely off topic about something that you guys are dealing with, you're addressing, it keeps you up at night?
I have a question. It's not necessarily about sport, but I'm from the Netherlands. There was a girl who in the Netherlands is sent to, maybe it was in the news here as well, but she's sent to United Airlines, I guess. I'm from the Taliban, I'm going to send a bomb in your plane. And the girl was 15 and she just did that, and United Air said, or was it United?
Doesn't matter,
was an
yeah.
airplane company, and they said, we're going to send, we deliver this to the FBI, we're going to put the FBI on it, will be at your door pretty soon, something like that. And she completely freaked out, but how legit, how can you do it? Is that possible to do that? Or
So are you asking
is
if...
that a real threat, or?
I mean, it kind of goes back to that child question. When do we report suspected child abuse? And the short answer is imminent harm. So if a person makes a threat that they're going to blow up an airplane, whether they're 12 or they're 92, I think there's an imminent threat, and you report it. I mean, one of the hardest things that I've had to do in my career, this is actually a bit of an interesting...
But sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But you also said use common sense.
Yeah.
And if I would use my common sense, I would say, well,
They're 15.
it's 15,
But how would they know that, just for argument's sake?
Look at all the Americans that get shot at schools with a 15-year-old.
True.
Could be somebody
Yeah, but
else
it's not-
with a 15.
Well, it could be a picture, right? Get a
That's
picture.
True. Yeah, but. Okay.
I mean, and I'll give you a perfect example, and my point is, in a scenario like that, I'd rather be cautious than not cautious, right? One of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, I sit on a couple screening committees, so anytime there's a positive police record check, it comes to me and a police officer and a parole officer, and we decide whether Joe Smith is a good coach or not. And talk about sanctioning and discipline and reciprocity. So this particular individual was in the USA, he was a coach. He'd been there 16 years, coach, and allegedly she kissed him and in a hotel room at a competition. He didn't report it. 6 weeks later, the father, who knows, reports it to the police. NSO gets word of the investigation, suspends the guy, okay, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Between the start of the criminal investigation and the end, he leaves. Where does he come? Here. And applies to be a coach with the PSO. And so we do a police record check. What comes back? Nothing, right? One, any conviction was in the US. It wouldn't come up on a PRC here. And two, he was not convicted. And the NSO in the US, when he left, stopped the process. They said, he's left, basically not our problem. We'll reconvene the process if he ever comes back to the USA. Okay, it's been 8 years. That 15-year-old girl is now 23 or 24, probably doesn't really want to go back and discuss the issue. The witnesses are God knows where. And I, as a decision maker, have no finding of guilt. I've got no NSO decision. The criminal charges were dropped, lack of evidence, but I've got no finding of guilt. Guy comes here. We learn about it because what happened was part of their screening policy required a letter from the previous NSO saying he was a member in good standing. So they say, we're not going to write that letter because he's not. We still have this outstanding investigation. So he gets a lawyer. He appeals the denial of membership, of coaching membership. And we were tasked to decide whether he was a good coach. I've got no criminal conviction. I've got no NSO conviction. I've got nothing. We denied him membership on policy. He didn't get that letter of good standing. I said, you know what? Go back to the USA, figure it out, come back, and when you've got that letter, we'll cross that bridge again. He gets a lawyer. Lawyer appeals it, goes to appeal. Part of the appeal process is to have a third-party interviewer. They interview him. He writes this 10-page report, says, I believe he's truthful, didn't sexually assault this girl, and now we have to decide whether he gets to coach or not. Okay, that scares the crap out of me. So we ended up interviewing subsequently. We spent 3 hours with the guy, asking him very difficult questions. And at the end of the day, we denied him membership. He may appeal that again. We should stop talking about it. Let that lying dog sleep. But my point is that from a discipline perspective and from supporting each other perspective, we got to see things through. And where I said, I've seen a volleyball coach who got kicked out of volleyball go to triathlon. And I've seen a gymnastics coach go from one province to another province. And we had to deal with it because there was no reciprocation between the provinces. Actually, that was here. I think it was here. Yeah. We ended up doing 3 hearings on that one guy. NSO, 2 PSOs to get rid of him. Anyway, talk amongst yourselves. As I said before, if you haven't been to our website, it really is a great resource. I'm happy to chat with any of you anytime. Just give me a call. We do it all the time, or an email. These 3 know better than anybody. And Lara Lee knows for sure. And, I know it's really easy for me to stand here and say, do this and do that. I really just kind of say, try and be proactive. Maybe try and tackle one issue this year and another issue next year, and you'll get there. And by the time you're done, it'll be time to start over again. But, at the end of the day, you guys know where you are. You know what problems you've had to deal with. I'd like to think that it's not been the end of the world, but there are people, Sport Manitoba, ourselves, there's other lawyers, consultants who are out there to help. There are resources available. So I really appreciate your time today. I know it's hard to get a day off or a day to take off, but thanks. I hope you found value in this, and that's it.